fun session. If this was not the one you intended to come to, I'll let you slip out now. Pretend I didn't see you. This morning we're going to learn the foundational skills of grassroots organizing and coalition building in just 45 minutes. This session is perfect for anyone interested in leading change, not just for Safe Streets, but for any community movement. So, have you read that description? I'll give you one more chance to leave it. And this morning we have some great workshop leaders, some really experienced firebrands here. One to my right is Brie Gyncild. She has been a community organizer for more than 30 years. She's energized by helping people effect change that improves their lives and the lives of others in their communities. Though she's been an advocate and activist for numerous progressive causes for the past decade, most of her efforts have been very local, with leadership roles in Central Seattle Greenways and other Central Seattle neighborhood groups working to improve the streets and public spaces we all rely on. We're fortunate to have Brie and her experience here today. And to my left, your right, is Tiffani McCoy. She was the campaign manager for the Yes on I-135 campaign, which created the first social housing developer in the United States. And the Prop 1A campaign that funded the Seattle social housing development.
Let's go. Let's go.
Yes. Prior to work at How's Our Neighbors, Tiffani worked at Real Change as the advocacy director. She strongly believes in the power of initiatives to enact bold public policy. Yay. So here we are. Who's starting off?
Brie is starting off. Thank you, David. It's pretty exciting to be here with Tiffani.
I forgot to say I'm David. I'm a board member. Somebody had to do this.
Tiffany's one of the most effective community organizers I know, so pretty excited to be up here with her today. Community Organizing 101, we thought this was a bit challenging to try to fit into 45 minutes. Community organizing itself is kind of a messy, non-linear process. We have attempted to break it into 5 topics, but it's not like you go through one and then you check it off and you're done, and you go on to the next. Kind of mix and match, and it's a very iterative process. So we're going to talk about each topic, but understand that it's not a simple flow that way. When we talk about community organizing, we are talking about bringing people together to find and build and use community collective power to make change. So that's what we're talking about. The key word there is together. People work much more effective and have much more power when we work together than when we work in isolation. And I use the word finding power, very deliberately, because a lot of people feel hopeless and helpless and don't realize that we can find our voices, we can find our power. And the way to do that is to come together and work collectively. And you, as an organizer, are the one who helps people find that power and bring them together. So we are going to talk about each of these topics. We are also going to try to weave in some context with 2 different campaigns. One, the Prop 1A campaign that Tiffani led, and the other, our very recent win at Pine and Fourth with protecting the bike lane, to talk about very different ways that these topics come into play. And we're also going to have with each section, we're going to have an opportunity for questions and comments. I have one quick question for the room here. How many of you are already experienced community organizers? Okay, how many of you are just dipping your toe in? Fantastic. Okay, so I know that some of you are being a little shy about what you've done, but that's fantastic. So we hope to learn from each other today. And I'm going to hand it over to Tiffani to talk about issues.
Thanks, Brie. So this is just an overview of the 5 main areas, and as Brie said, we'll leave an opportunity for some brief questions between each of these 5 bullet points. We will be mindful of time. Again, it's just 45 minutes, and we want to make sure to get to each of these 5. But as Brie said, this is a messy process. Even though we've won campaigns, we're still back to agitating around things that we've already won, because just because you win something policy-wise at the city level doesn't mean that elected officials just roll out the red carpet in order to enact it. It's up to us to make sure that they actually uphold the campaign wins. So thank you, Brie. First is figuring out what is your issue that you want to work on, what is your issue or policy that you want to change. or just your overall area of concern. Maybe you don't even know what the policy is that you need to change, but you really don't like the fact that we don't have enough affordable housing in the city of Seattle. So is it getting involved with Seattle Neighborhood Greenways? Is it getting involved with House Our Neighbors, looking out at the terrain in Seattle and figuring out who may already be doing what it is that you're interested in and plugging in there? And just because there are folks that are doing what you're doing doesn't mean that it's always, the approach that you want to take. There are folks that believe more in going through the current paths of power, going through elected officials in order to make change. If the city council right now doesn't agree that we should make 4th and Pine a safe street, okay, well, we'll just wait for the next council. Not maligning anything here today, just saying that there are different ways that people go to make change and to organize. I would say most of us in this room believe in the power of the people to make change and don't just rely on our elected officials to make that change, so that's why we're also probably in this workshop. Maybe I'm making a bit of a jump there. But you want to identify who to reach out to. Are you going to start a new coalition, like with House Our Neighbors? I was part of Real Change, but there was a charter amendment that was going to enshrine the sweeps of our unhoused neighbors into our city charter as a cornerstone of our homelessness policy. I didn't see anyone organizing against this charter amendment in 2021, so I was reaching out to people that I knew that would be interested in creating a new coalition to fight against this charter amendment. Or is it plugging into SNG that already does incredible things and tactical urbanism, and you just want to get involved in that because you see the efficacy of that? When you are putting together a coalition, let's just say that for the sake of time that we have today, putting your coalition together, you want to also be checking yourself, especially, in Seattle, which has a lot of really well-meaning white people, making sure that you're checking your privilege as a white individual and that you're going to the folks that are the most impacted, the most affected. I think, just speaking for House Our Neighbors, one of the reasons we are so powerful and probably a threat to the establishment is because we organize with folks who are unhoused, folks who are poor, folks who are deemed powerless by the powers that be. I think it's the same for SNG, bringing in folks that are the most impacted but don't usually be brought to the table. But just always be checking yourself as a coalition, as an organizer. Who else should be here? Who are we listening to? Who isn't at the table that should be? But also recognizing at the end of the day, if you have a coalition that wants to go forward, and if you're going to center equity and impact, and recognize too that some of our most marginalized neighbors don't have the time or the capacity or the ability to advocate or to take time out. A lot of things don't provide childcare. A lot of folks have to work multiple jobs in order to make ends meet. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go forward. It's just always being really aware of your own positionality. And then once you get your group together, define your objective, your goal, or your campaign together. Especially to my white folks in the audience, don't come up with an idea and then go get people on board with your idea. Go and get the idea collectively. Yes, so for Prop 1A, I'll just say social housing in general, like the movement that started about 5 years ago, that came out of the No campaign to Charter Amendment 29 that would have created sweeps as the cornerstone of our homelessness policy. You might be thinking, Tiffani, isn't that already effectively what the city of Seattle does? Yes, arguably. However, we did not want that in the city charter. And out of that coalitional effort came House Our Neighbors, which now has won 2 ballot initiatives to create social housing and to fund it.
And thinking about the Pine and 4th, we have done, Symposium Greenways have done a bike audit of the Pine corridor after the bike lanes were finished to identify all the places where they weren't quite finished and where we wanted to see improvements. And one of the places we did identify was at Pine and 4th, and we were able to stand there and watch for a little bit and see how traffic was moving, and we were very clear about the issue, which was that the bike lane veered to the right around a curb bulb just as traffic was dividing into 2 lanes, and the bike lane was no longer protected there. So we were seeing drivers drive right over the bike lane. It was pretty clear that drivers weren't aware that the bike lane was there, and that cyclists still felt protected from the bike lane, and then suddenly weren't. And so they were trying to do something that in physics we know is impossible, which is to have 2 objects in the same space. So we identified that issue at that time. So let's move on to, let's find out first. Just talking about the issue, I want to emphasize again something that Tiffani said, which is that basically your issue you shouldn't define your issue without talking to people who are most affected, right? And that how you define your issue as we go through this whole process will change. As you learn more information, as more perspectives come in, you're creating together a sense of what the actual problem is and how to fix it. So it's not, you don't come up with an issue definition and then stick with that permanently. It's very iterative. Does that make sense? Are there questions or anything people want to share related to this? All right, well, okay.
Oh, I have a question.
Yeah.
This is kind of maybe related to the point that Tiffany, that you're making in terms of like trying to like acknowledge people's like capacity. Like, how do you kind of like engage those conversations? Because this can obviously be very delicate conversations, especially when going across positionalities or going across like power. How do you kind of like make sure that you have like good conversations on that feel productive and feel like the other person feels heard, you know?
Yeah, I would say it's not a cookie cutter, but it's making sure that if you are in a leadership position, if you're like part of a coalition main core, that you are making the time in order for those communities to have the ability to participate. So is it taking them out to coffee? Like at Real Change, when we would have vendors go and lobby at City Hall, I was always buying them a meal. And making sure that they also were doing it at a time that wasn't like a high time for them to sell their paper and to make their income. But then is it also like, is it childcare an issue? Is it, I can only meet in the morning or I can only meet really late at night? And if you are seeking these communities' input, you need to make the time as the organizer to do that, not expect them to make the time for you. You're the one that wants to affect this change. You're the one that wants to get this input. You need to make the space and the capacity and the time and fulfill whatever other needs are needed in order to do that. One other really quick example I'll give is when we were creating the charter for the social housing developer, we know that even though we have a renter majority governing board for the social housing developer, that renters don't just have the ability to always show up and be on boards, because that is childcare out of pocket that they have to pay for, that's taking time off of their job. So us making sure that stipends were required, that they're paid for that time on that board, so that you can have the single mother who can actually show up and make money or get childcare in order to be able to participate. We need to be taking down as many barriers to participation as we can.
Thank you.
That was a great question. Any other questions or thoughts? Yeah?
The top one, how do you identify like people? Is it?
Yeah, so again, this is thinking
Repeat
about...
the question.
You're thinking about a couple things, right? You're thinking about people who are most affected, right? Who are going to be most passionate about whatever this is that you're trying to do. And you're also thinking about who you already have relationships with and how you can use those relationships to reach more people too. It's going to be different for everything. And a lot of, so I will say what's really challenging about this, we tried to figure out how to talk about organizing without talking about a specific campaign planning, and it's really hard to pull the two apart. But one of the things that you're always doing, no matter what campaign you're working on, is you're trying to build a movement. So you're not just working with people on a specific issue, on a specific campaign, you're working with people toward creating a common vision of the world that we want to create together, right? So thinking about 4th of Pine, for example, when we wanted to pull people together for an action, we'd already done the community organizing to have those people to reach out to. But earlier on, who you reach out to, well, obviously anyone who bikes in the city or wants to bike in the city is going to be affected. And the people who have the least political power who want to bike in the city are going to be affected. We're also talking about things like reaching out to bus drivers or, people who don't want to hit cyclists are going to be affected. And kind of try to get a little, think outside the box a little bit. Who are the people who might care about this? Is that?
It does, yeah.
Okay, I'm told we're going to move on. So the next thing we're going to talk about is building partnerships and coalition. And again, this is kind of along the same line. We work better when we work in partnership, right? We have a lot more power if we have multiple organizations coming together, multiple communities coming together, asking or demanding the same thing. Again, this is thinking about who's most affected and whose voices are at the table. You don't want to be imposing change on somebody because you think it's right. Because if you are not in coalition with the folks who are most affected, you're going to miss something. You're not going to know what the best answers are, and you can't speak for other people. So the goal is to help other people speak for themselves. With this in mind, we always want to bring everybody to the table, but sometimes you need to move forward with a less than perfect coalition and acknowledge that. Acknowledge who's not in the room and continue moving forward, but keep trying to reach folks. And like Tiffani said, kind of keep checking your privilege and understanding. And sometimes it's not you're not the right people to be doing this, and you walk away from an issue until you can make sure that the people who are most represented are there. I feel like I'm kind of rambling on that. But over and over again, the most important thing, both in terms of equity and fairness and justice, but also in terms of advocacy, is making sure the people who are most affected are the ones who are helping to shape the issues and strategies and solutions. Because they're the ones who actually know how their lives are affected by whatever it is you're trying to change. The last one is actually the most important one, I think, on this slide, and that is to build trust. The relationships that you have today determine the relationships you have tomorrow. When you work with other folks on an issue, don't think of it as a transactional relationship, right? They're not there just to do this for you so that you can do this other thing for them. You need to show up, you need to be present, and you need to be real, and you need to listen, and they should be doing the same with you. And that way, down the road, you have people you can call when you need to build more support toward whatever the movement is doing next. Just as an example of that, we, Central Seattle Greenways works in coalition with a lot of different groups at a lot of different times. And the initial projects that we work on, sometimes it's a little bumpy because we don't know each other well. But once we've built that trust, then we know we can depend on each other and we know who we're working with, and it's much easier to pull things together quickly. So one of the things, so thinking about Pine and Fourth on this, when we had defined the issue, and then when we wanted to do something and get the attention right away, we took advantage of the fact that Cascade was having their annual lunch, their Bike Everywhere Day lunch that day, to do our big event and get the media there, because we knew that a lot of the city leaders would be at that lunch and that Cascade would support us in getting them out to the event. Again, that's because of partnerships and long relationships. What's that? We're halfway through. Okay. 45 minutes really isn't very long. Do you want to talk about how this works with?
Yeah. The only thing I'll touch on, because I feel like I did broach this a bit in the last slide, is the building trust. I think it's also about showing the broader public that you are there for the goal that you set out, not for your own political advancement or your own political power. So this matters so much to us at House Our Neighbors with our steering committee that we have a piece in our charter that is calling in an accountability step. Like, if people are starting to use this movement to advance their own political positionality, like, oh, I'm really close now with the mayor, and this mayor says that we need to do this, so I'm going to now bring that perspective into our organizing space. No. That's about us being there for the movement and the goal, not us there to make our own political path forward.
Nice.
I'm going to ask folks to hold questions because we're going to move along to education. So education is a huge part, because even though I care about social housing, and even though we care about safe streets, a regular individual on the street that cares a lot about, like, how am I going to be able to pay my grocery bill, might be really interested in social housing, but if you don't make it an accessible topic for them to see why they should take time out of their busy day to sign a petition or to vote in a special election, you are going to be missing an opportunity to educate the general public about the issue that matters to you. What I can say from our initiative wins and from the campaign wins of SNG and other coalitions in this room is regular people in Seattle care a lot about making this city better for everyone. And if you give them the opportunity to do that, they will participate in it. But it is up to us as organizers and as coalitions to educate folks about the things that matter to us. If the Initiative 135 and Prop 1A campaign didn't have a robust education component, we wouldn't have won because people might think it sounds good on the ballot, but they don't know for sure. And then you'll have people that, like affordable housing developers, that are saying, don't vote for this, and people might waffle. But because we're out there educating, doing field work, being at farmers markets, being at neighborhood groups, doing panels and get-togethers, and doing lunch and learns, and doing events in the day for folks who have a work schedule like mine that you can do that, but also holding events in the evening for folks who don't have the ability to tune in at their 9-to-5 job, and then also providing childcare and a meal, just like we see here today at this symposium. And then when doing education, it's also a lot of one-on-one outreach. So getting endorsements from other groups, talking to them about why this matters to them. I'll say just for what we worked on, there were a couple of unions that you would think would be in favor of social housing, but weren't in favor of social housing because they got wrong information that their members wouldn't benefit from it. Where in fact their members would benefit from social housing because they make too much money in order to qualify for affordable housing. So doing that one-on-one outreach, even if someone in power shuns you, always having the integrity to be there to have a conversation should they change their mind. That might not feel good, but again, if your goal is ultimately the issue or the area of concern of the policy, it's showing up with integrity and being there to advance that individual or that union or that coalition or that organization towards your overall goal. So do the education, make it incredibly accessible. Don't use a lot of acronyms. Try to get a cross-section of the population to talk to different cross-sections of the population. Just do not skip out on education. Don't just go from your coalition straight to lobbying or an initiative. You won't win without education. And you also want those people to have a vested interest in the future. Now we have a vested interest of folks that support social housing. So when the mayor or the city council are doing some messy things, we can call on them and they will show up because they have a vested interest in this.
I want to throw one more thing in too, and that is that education actually goes both ways. When you're educating people, you're also learning from them because they also share their perspective, and those are stories that can be very useful later, and they can also, again, help to shape that vision for a future that we all want.
Yes.
Any questions or thoughts about the last two sessions? Education can be the most fun, honestly. David.
I have a question which this might not really be the right venue for, but you kind of touched on this, Tiffany. It was like, if you find that someone you're in a coalition with or someone you're working with on whatever level that happens to be is not the right person for any number of possible reasons, how do you handle that?
How do you fire a coalition member?
Yeah, basically.
I'm giving that to Tiffany.
You know, we've been talking to folks in Tacoma who also want to do a social housing initiative, and they're kind of having this question. They know that having labor in their core group would be really helpful for a lot of reasons. We didn't have labor in our core group for a lot of reasons. They're supporters, they're in our broader coalition, but I think there is a lot of benefit in having your core groups as our steering committee, which are like-minded,